everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. We'll be doing a methodology breakdown of Vera's plastic waste reduction standard, PWRM0002, and this is for plastic waste recycling. So in our agenda today, we'll talk about who Envision blockchain is, we'll do a Guardian overview, a recap of our previous webinars, we'll go through our policy development checklist, then we can do an introduction of PWRM0002. We'll talk about plastic waste recycling and how waste recycling credits are calculated. And then we'll go through our schema and workflow before doing a demo of the policy in the Guardian. Envision Blockchain Solutions builds applications for the Web3 space, and we focus on guiding organizations through three major milestones on their Web3 journey: use case analysis, proof of concept development, scaled deployments, and we're also the builders and maintainers of the Guardian. So today, the process of designing and collecting the supporting data for carbon claims is heavily manual and prone to errors such as poor data quality, lack of assurance, potential double counting, greenwashing. And so the Guardian is here to fix some of those issues. So to the right, you see our policy configurator. And you see that we have these different workflows in different colors, and we'll talk about it more when we go into our demo. But you could think of a policy inside of the Guardian as a digital version of a methodology. We call it DMRV. And you can use the policy workflow blocks like Legos to design your desired workflow. In the center of the system are four main technologies that help us provide trustworthy and clear solutions for the carbon market. We use decentralized identifiers, also known as DIDs. These are unique identifiers that let individuals and groups create their own IDs using systems that they trust. DIDs ensure that carbon credits go to the right parties and can't be duplicated or tampered with. We also use verifiable credentials, VCs. These are digital documents that give information about the subject, who issued it, the type of credential, specific details about the subject, and proof of how the credential was obtained. VCs make sure that carbon credits are given only to those who meet the necessary requirements and that the credits are valid and trustworthy. We also use verifiable presentations, and VPs are a group of one or more VCs, which we'll see towards the end of our demo today, where the trust chain is. So let's do a quick recap of our past webinars. Each webinar focuses on a specific methodology from our open source library, and it's aimed at helping our users or anyone interested in the Guardian to understand how these methodologies can be streamlined for efficient implementation. We've covered methodologies from Vera, Gold Standard, and CDM, and you can find videos for each one of these at the Envision Blockchain YouTube channel. So here you see some of the Vera ones, like the adoption of sustainable agriculture and land management, which is similar to VM42, which is for improved agriculture land management. We've also done some comparison of these. So we have a comparison between Vera's afforestation, reforestation, and revegetation versus Gold Standard's afforestation and reforestation. We also have some CDM policies here, and we have a continuation of this list. We also have a policy for PWRM0001, which we'll be comparing today to the PWRM0002. So one is for plastic waste collection, and the one we're doing today is for plastic waste recycling. Now let's go through our policy development checklist. This was created by our environmental consultants, and these are the steps that they take to design a policy and get that policy digitized. So when you create a well-defined policy, this is extremely crucial to make sure that you are implementing the Guardian tool into your project. So let's go through the steps together. We have step one that says we want to identify the standard and an appropriate methodology. You want to begin by identifying the relevant standard and methodology that aligns with your project's goals and requirements. This will serve as the foundation for developing your policy. Step two is to review the standard and methodology documents. You'll want to make sure that you read through the documentation provided by the standard and methodology, ensuring that there's a comprehensive understanding of their guidelines, criteria, and principles. So if you're familiar with any of these methodologies from Vera, Gold Standard, maybe CDM, you know that these PDFs have a lot of information in there. It's like 300 pages, and you want to make sure that we're putting all of that into the policy that goes into the Guardian. So we want the user to know everything that's expected of them, what are the steps that they have to follow, what information are we capturing, in order to mint the correct amount of credits. Step 3 is to identify roles, processes, and requirements. By identifying the various roles involved, you'll be able to define the responsibilities in the Guardian. Then determine the necessary processes and requirements outlined by the standard. So later in the presentation, we'll be looking at a workflow for this policy, and there you'll be able to see what we mean when we say identify roles, identify the processes. So we're really trying to make sure that we know what roles are involved, what are they doing, and when are they doing it. Step 4 is to identify input parameters and equations. We want to understand the specific input parameters and equations used in the methodology. These will be essential for accurately calculating and reporting the correct values. Step 5 is to create a workflow and schema. And this is when you would develop a clear workflow and schema that outlines a step-by-step process for using the Guardian within your project. This will help streamline operations and ensure consistent application. And then the final step is to configure your policy within the Guardian. So going back to the policy that we're talking about today, which is PWRM0002, this is focused on plastic waste recycling and it's version 1.1. The PWRM0002 methodology outlines procedures for estimating additional plastic waste recycled through chemical and/or mechanical recycling activities. It covers installation of new recycling facilities, capacity additions, technology improvements, and initiatives to increase collection and sorting of plastic waste. Projects must demonstrate additionality by showing that the recycling activities go beyond business as usual practices. Here's some of the conditions for applicability. You want your project activities to include one of the following: installation of new recycling facilities, capacity addition or technology improvement of existing facilities, incentivizing and facilitating increased collection and sorting of plastic waste. And some key points are that the projects must provide evidence of increased recycling through collection and sorting initiatives. Recycling facilities processing collected or sorted plastic waste must be included in the project boundary. And procedures must be in place to prevent double counting of recycled plastic waste. This methodology is applicable under the following conditions. The plastic waste being recycled is either collected or diverted from the environment, landfill, open burning, incineration with energy recovery, households and/or commercial entities, incineration without energy recovery, or any other waste management option that does not allow for a second life of plastic waste. Now, why is plastic recycling beneficial? Some of the benefits include landfill reduction, pollution prevention, job creation, circular economy, climate change mitigation, community engagement, and wildlife protection. When we talk about how we calculate these credits, there are 4 major steps that we're going to be taking. The first one is to demonstrate additionality. The project proponent must follow the steps outlined in the methodology to demonstrate additionality. In this policy, you'll see when we go through the Excel that we have certain questions that are set up and the user will interact with them in the policy. There they can answer yes or no to certain questions and will determine if this project is additional or not. The second major step is calculating the baseline plastic waste recycled. And the baseline plastic waste recycled is the amount of plastic waste that would have been recycled in the absence of the project activity. The third one is calculating the project plastic waste recycled, and this is very similar to the baseline one, except all the data and calculations that are happening here are focusing on the project activity. So what happened in that project scenario. Then the fourth one is calculating the net plastic waste recycled. And the net plastic waste recycled is the amount of plastic waste that was recycled by the project activity that would have not been recycled without project implementation. That's also the value that we'll be minting against, is that net plastic waste recycled, which we can see the equation in this next slide. So here we see that the net value that was recycled is that blue, and it's going to be dependent on the year that you're filling out your data for. This is also in a measurement of tons. So in order for us to get that net value, we need to subtract the project value from the baseline value. And again, if you were filling this out for 2019, all your data should be from 2019. And then we'll know how many WRCs we need to mint, which are waste recycling credits. So let's take a look at the schema and workflow. This is just an example of what the schema looks like, but we can exit out of here and go to the Excel. So we like to organize everything in the Excel, and we can call this the policy design. You'll see that we have some sort of template up here, which is the required field column, selective disclosure, if we want to allow multiple answers, schema type, parameter, question, and answer. And when we go into the Guardian and we look at the schemas, when you create one from scratch, these fields would be filled out. So you can choose if you want it to be required, if you want it to be encrypted with the selective disclosure, if you want the user to have the ability to insert multiple answers for that one field. We'll describe what the schema type is, or the field type. The parameter is more for this design document in the Excel to keep track of the equations and how they're set up within the PDF. Then we'll have the question. When you go into the Guardian, this is called the description. And then these are just answers. So here we're providing some sample answers to know if our calculations are correct. If a user is maybe not sure what they're expected to answer there, they can go ahead and look at this Excel, which would be in the GitHub as well. Then we have these rows that are in gray, and this here would be considered the schema. So everything from row 3 to row 28 would belong to the project detail schema. We could say this is schema 1. So here we're capturing information about the project participant. We have some location questions here of what's their latitude, longitude. We'll also get some coordinates for the GeoJSON. We have the start date, crediting period, monitoring plan, as well as what methodology are they referencing here. Then we have if it's compliant with the laws. We have the sustainable development, so maybe your project captures other SDGs, not just the one that's associated with this project. For example, I've stated that this one's for 13. Maybe you capture some other ones there and you can include that in this field. Then we have some that are specific to PWRM0002, like they would like us to collect some yearly proof of the end destinations of plastic waste. And that can be collected as some receipts or contractual agreements. So we've defined this schema type as image. And I've also put yes, that this should allow multiple answers. So the user can go ahead and insert multiple receipts or contractual agreements if they have more than one. Then we have some help text here, and we can collect any further information. So now we're moving into the schema for additionality. We could say this is schema 2 here. And this one, you'll see that we have one field, but I'm prompting the developer to the sheet for additionality. So we have several fields here that belong to that schema. And we'll see that this first one says, are the material types mandatorily recycled? The user can answer yes or no. And I've provided some notes of what flow we should follow. So if yes, we should proceed to step 1.1, which would be this one here. If no, then the user would automatically go to step 2. We have this flow chart here that's coming directly from the Methodologies PDF. And this is exactly what we're trying to capture in this Excel. It's all these questions, what happens with the yes and no. And we'll also capture additional information. As you see here, under each one, it says provide an explanation to justify the answer, and the user can go ahead and type up their explanation. Now here you see that we've outlined all the steps, but when you go into the policy, and I'll show you when we're demoing it, if I selected yes, then here I see all the steps. So I should go to step 1.1 as that user. If I said no, I should go to step 2. So even though we see it in the Excel when we're interacting with the policy, you won't see step 1.1 if you selected no. It automatically takes you to step 2. So now we're going into the baseline, which was that second point in the slide from the major steps we're taking. We have the additionality, now the baseline. Here you see that we have some questions, and this will determine the path that the user should take. So this policy has 3 options. We have option 1 for the project that is a new activity. If the project is a capacity addition, that'd be option 2. And option 3 would be that the project activity is incentivizing or facilitating an increase in the collection and sorting of plastic waste. So depending on the answer would depend on what data we need to collect from the user. We also have some notes here. So you'll see if the user selected option 1, then G36 would be 0. And G36 is the value for the baseline plastic recycling. So the user would not have to fill out any information for the baseline if they selected option 1. This would automatically be set to 0. Now you also see that we have some color coding here. We like to use the light green for any questions that are being asked to determine the flow of this policy. We have the darker green for any auto calculation. So any of that dark green, the user would not see in the project form. It would show up in the BC doc once everything has been calculated. Then we have the white ones for user input. So this will show up in the form, as well as the light green ones that are questions. So we can continue going down, and we see that we have the project. So a lot of these questions are going to be the same as the baseline, except the data should be for the project scenario, not the baseline. And if we continue down, we see the net recycled plastic. So here, if we click on the equation, we see that we have G70 minus G36. This is going to be the project recycled minus the baseline recycled. And then we get the net. So when we mint today, we should be minting 62. You'll also see in the VC docs that after all the calculations occurred, this value will be 62.4. And now here's a workflow that we were talking about earlier. So here we want to outline what roles we have in this policy and what they're expected to do and when they're expected to do it. So we have the project proponent, the VVB, and Vera as a standard registry. When we go into the policy in the Guardian, you'll see that I'll only create a user for the project proponent and the VVB because Vera is going to be the administrator. So I'm logged in as a standard registry user. I won't have to create a new user for Vera. It will already be there. Once Vera has approved these users, then the project proponent will go ahead and fill out the project design document, which would have information for the project details, additionality, the baseline, the project recycling, and the net recycled plastic waste. Everything that you saw in the Excel would be within that document. Then they would submit it, and Vera will add this project to the project pipeline. Then the VVB will review, and whether they approve and reject is dependent on if they verified everything and saw that it was all correct, or if it needs to go back to the project proponent. Once they've approved it, the project activities begin monitoring. This is when you're going to collect data and use it to fill out your monitoring report. And the monitoring report should be updated and filled depending on the guidelines from PWRM0002. So when you go towards the end of any methodology, there will usually be parameters there that tell you the frequency that you should be updating those. And you want to go ahead and update it in your monitoring report. Then you'll submit it, and the VVB will again have the ability to approve or reject it. Once they've approved it, then Vera will add it to the project registry. And Vera will do a final review and approve the WRCs that are issued. That's when the minting will happen. So now let's go ahead and go into the Guardian. We could do a quick walkthrough of different features that we have in there and how you can use them. So here we're specifically in the Managed Guardian service, and this could be customized if you wanted to change the color of this banner. If you want to put your company's logo and put the name up here, you can do that. So right now I'm in the profile, and you can get there by clicking on Manage Guardian Service. So you'll see that we have the DID document, the BC document, balance, hedera account ID, DID, user topic, and initialization topic. We also have these two drop downs here, one for policy and one for tokens. We're going to open the policy one and click on schemas. So here you see that I already have some schemas in here. If you were new to Managed Guardian Service, there would be nothing in there until you import a policy. So I already have PWRM0001 and 0002 imported, and that's why we're seeing some schemas here. I can also filter the ones I want by policy. So maybe I only want to see the PWRM0002 schemas. I can click that. And now we're only seeing it for that policy. So we could scroll all the way down and see how many schemas we have for this policy, which is a total of 16. And we can also check PWRM0001 since we'll be comparing these policies. This one has a total of 14 schemas. Then we also have some tabs for policy schemas, module schemas, tag schemas, system schemas, and tool schemas. So depending on which one it is that you're creating, you can go ahead and click in those tabs. You'll see these buttons here to the top right. We have one for creating a schema. If you want to do one from scratch, you can click that first button. You can also get an Excel template in here. So the template's going to look a little different from the Excel that I showed you. This is going to separate it schema by schema, but you can insert all your fields, what field type you want it to be, if it's required or not, you would define that in there. And then to import it, you can click this button, which is the third one, and click the third option of import from Excel. And you could go ahead and drag your file in here or click on this box and it'll open up your file explorer. You can also import from file or import from IPFS using a timestamp. Now, if you were creating one from scratch, again, you'd click this first button. And here you can go ahead and give your schema a name. You can choose what policy it belongs to. If you want it to be a verifiable credential, encrypted verifiable credential, or default. So if we were to select encrypted verifiable credential, we could scroll down, add a field, and you'll see that we have this private button here, which I could select as true or false. And let's say I was asking a user for an address, but they want to keep that private, then this schema and this field in here should be private. Now, if we are going to keep it public, we could go ahead and just keep this as a verifiable credential. And we can keep adding fields to this schema. You also see we have the field type here where you can define the field type as a number, integer, string. We have many options. You can also use a defined schema. You can select if you want this to be required or not. So if you want it required, you just select that. If you want it to be optional, you can select none. And if it were something like the auto calculate that I said the user wouldn't see within their form, then you can select hidden. If you select into the advanced mode, you'll see that we have a key and a title. If we go down to the fields, you'll see that we have field 0 here, field 1. You'll still put in your descriptions. However, this is going to be helpful when you're doing the JavaScript to know what fields it is that you're doing calculations for or you're defining. So let's go ahead and compare. You can compare by selecting that fourth button there. We're going to select the policy, the first one we want to compare, and then we can select the second one. We can compare the project description since we have one for both. Let's see what's the difference. And click compare. So now we're seeing that the schemas are 40% the same. To the left, we have PWRM0001, and to the right is PWRM0002. We can also collapse this. And now let's look at one of the ones that are completely green, meaning that the fields are completely equal. If it were green and yellow, the subschemas are partially equal. Yellow is for fields that are partially equal, and red is for a match not found. So let's click on field 2. And here we see that they both have the name and title of field 2. The descriptions are the same for project type. We have it listed as required. We have a type string, ordered to, and read only false. So this is going to be 100% the same. Now, if we look at one that's yellow, let's look at field 23. We see that field 23 has the same name and title. However, the description is the same. Different. So we have further information here that we're looking for. And then this one's going to be that yearly proof that could be receipts or contractual agreements. So this is really dependent on where you place your fields within the schema, because it will have further information within the PWRM0002 project description. However, it's listed as field 25. So within the project description, PWRM0002 is going to have a total of 25 fields, where the one in PWRM0001 only has a total of 23 fields. So let's open this back up and we can go into the tokens. Let's see what tokens we have for these policies. So because I have both imported, we'll see the 2 tokens in here. We have the WCC, which is the waste collection credit for PWRM0001, and we have the waste recycling credit for PWRM0002. You can also create your own token if you're creating a policy. You could change it from a draft status to published, give it a token name, a token symbol. You can list it as fungible or non-fungible. If it's fungible, you'll have this for decimals. So if I want it to have 2 decimal places, if it's non-fungible, there will be no decimal places as we don't have fractional NFTs. Then we have the admin key and wipe key, wipe contract, freeze key, and KYC key that you could disable or enable. We're going to click into the policies tab here. And we see that we have both of them in dry run. You can look at the workflow blocks by clicking on this pencil or pen for the policy configuration. So we can go ahead and take a look at PWRM0002, which is the policy we're looking at today. And you'll see that we have all these workflow blocks. So purple is going to be for the UI components, blue is for the server components, orange is for the add-ons, and black is for the defaults. It'll be a black box. Then you see that we have the Vera header. So everything in here is the steps that Vera is going to be taking and all the information that goes in and out. Then we have, if we scroll down, we have some of the trust chain here. And now we're in the project proponent header. So everything in there is the steps that the project proponent is going to be taking. And if we continue down, we have the VBB's container. So again, everything inside that container is the steps that the VBB is taking. Now we could go back to the policies and click on compare to see what's the difference between the workflow blocks from PWRM0001 versus 0002. Then we're going to click compare. And we see that the policies are 86% the same. So we'll see that these 2 policies have the same roles, the project proponent and the VBB. And as I mentioned before, you're not going to see Vera or standard registry in here, as this account is a standard registry user. Then we have the policy blocks. So green is going to be that all the blocks are equal, including their child blocks. Green and yellow is that the blocks are equal, but their child blocks are different. Yellow is that the blocks are of the same type but are partially equal. And then red is that the blocks are absent in the other policy. So here you'll see that we have that partial one because some of these files are different, even though we have some that are the same down here. We can look at the token one, that it's a full yellow there. So we see that this token is going to be minting based off field 3, and this one's based off field 8 within that schema. Then we have different tokens, the WCC and the WRC, but they're both non-fungible, and we have some other options here that are still the same. And now you'll see that many of these are exactly the same as we're following the same workflows. However, there's going to be different schemas referenced within these files, as you can see here, since they're different policies using different schemas. All right, so let's go ahead and fill out the information for PWRM0002. We could do that by selecting register. And we're going to be adding some users. So let's add 2 users, one for the project proponent and one for the BBB. You could click on this drop down and you'll see we have this administrator, which will always be here. We have virtual user 1 and virtual user 2. We're going to select virtual user 1. And assign the project proponent role. Now you see that they're able to add a new project. We see their progress bar here. But before we do that, we're going to go to the BBB and assign them their role, which was virtual user 2. Then we're going to select next. And this is asking the BBB to provide a name. So I'm going to go ahead and just name them BBB and click create. So now we see it says waiting for approval. This is when the standard registry would go ahead and approve the BBB's account. They can view the document, which would be all the information that the BBB provided. We are only asking for the name. However, this is fully customizable. So if you were creating the schemas for your own policy, you can go ahead and add more fields as required for the BBB. Maybe you want their name, what company they work for, any information associated to them. Then we can select approve. And now we're going to go ahead and go back to the project proponent to fill out this new project form by clicking on the new project button. So here we're going to see all the schemas and all the required fields in that Excel that need a user input. So we're starting with the project details. We're going to give a summary description. Usually this would be in a paragraph form. We're going to put that this policy, or we could say project, estimates of plastic recycled. Then we're going to say this is total scope 13. The project type is waste recycling. This is just a regular project, not a large project. We're going to provide some information for the location, like the latitude. And then here you have the option to select if you want this to be in point, polygon, line string, multi-point, multi-polygon, and multi-line string. I'm going to select point and provide some coordinates there. say that the organization is X Plastics Group. And if we had multiple contacts, we can continuously add these fields and put multiple names, multiple titles, or addresses. We'll say that the owner of this project is X Plastics Group. And they're referencing the PWRM0002 policy or methodology, the start date. You can either type it in or you could select this calendar here and put the date. All right, and then this is going to be following the PWRM0002 monitoring plan. Say yes. And here we're going to be adding an image. So I'm going to be using a random sample data that's in the form of an Excel. It's a screenshot of an Excel. So if I had multiple receipts or contractual agreements, I could go ahead and keep adding these fields and add images to that. Then we have some help text here that says if waste contains hazardous substances, it must be managed through environmentally and socially appropriate technologies and processes in accordance with the relevant national, regional, or local regulations and guidelines. So now we're moving into the additionality determination, and this is where we can select yes or no and provide an explanation. So if I select yes, it would redirect me to step 1.1. But as I mentioned in the Excel, if I select no, it should take me to step 2, as you see here. So I'm going to select yes, yes for that question and for this one. And now we see the recycling activity is additional. Then you'll provide some info here. This would usually be in the form of some paragraphs. And then we'll be answering the questions about the baseline to determine what path we should be taking. So I'm going to say that this project is a capacity addition. And then I'll choose this first option that the baseline recycling is equal to the average annual recycling rate. And now I have to explain what material type I have here. I'm going to say this is a type 1 bottle. I'm going to apply the default factors. You can use the default factor or use sampling to determine the fraction of plastic in the composite material. I'm using default factors here. And then I have values that are based off of what answer you have here. So we'll see that in the auto calculation. And then you want to say how much plastic waste was recycled in year Y, and this is going to be in tons. And this is without depolymerization. So I'm going to add an entity. We would want to do this every time we have a different material type. I'm going to put some values in here. the mass fraction of 1. And now it's asking where this data was sourced from. So I'll say that this was an on-site measurement. And you would be inserting a picture here of the data that you collected on site. And again, you can add multiple images if you click on Add Fields. We're going to add an entity to put a different type of material. And then we'll go to the project, plastic recycling. We have one material type left, and then we could submit this form. And now you'll see that this button turned a darker shade, and we can go ahead and click Create. So now we see that the status says waiting to be added. So we have to go to the administrator's account, which is the standard registry. We're going to go ahead and click Next to go to the Projects tab there. We can scroll and see the View Document. So here we're going to have the VC doc that has all the auto calculations. If we scroll down, we'll see that there are some data points that we didn't insert. They've been calculated. So you can see we have how much of the baseline, what's the baseline amount of recycled plastic waste in that year. We didn't insert anything with 41.6. That's been auto-calculated, as well as this 1.6. You'll see this is the adjustment factor based off this option we put in here. And you'll also see the images that were added. And then if we go all the way down, we see the net recycled plastic waste in year Y of 62.4, which was the same thing we had in the Excel. And we can go ahead and add this to the project pipeline. Now going back to virtual user 1 or the project proponent, we have to assign the VBB. You'll see an assign column here. Click that drop down and select the VBB. So if you had multiple VBB accounts, you'll see them here. We just have one, so we're going to select that and click next. We can go to next for the monitoring report that we'll be back to fill out. And then going to the VBB, we're in the VBB documents tab. Let's go to the projects by clicking next. And now they'll be able to see that same document that has all the calculations, everything that's been auto-calculated. They should see the total amount of net recycled plastic waste and all the images. And we can select Validate. So now we can go ahead and fill out that monitoring report. Let's go back to the projects. We'll scroll and we see an Add Report button here. So all of this is going to be filled out already. You would be updating this based on the frequency that the methodology specifies. So maybe there's only a few fields that you have to update. You would do that here and then click Create. So now we can go to the VBB where they should have access to this monitoring report when they're in the monitoring reports tab. They can view that document and they can select verify. So now that it's been verified, one of the final steps is that the standard registry has to execute the mint. So we're going to go ahead and go to the monitoring reports. They can view this document. They see the status says verified, and they mint. Now we see it says minting. You'll see some notifications down here that it started, it completed, and transferred. It says minted now, and we can go to the VPs tab, see how many. We have 62, and we can view the trust chain. So let's go ahead and collapse this. And we see here we have the token, the amount, the recipient's name, the mint date. You also see what's the policy, that it's in dry run. And then we have the trust chain down here. So this is every step we just took, who was in charge of that. We have the VC files for all of them. So we see the project was created. We have the automatic completion of the project fields. That's where all the auto calculations live. The project was validated. We have the monitoring report created. And as you could see, this was the project proponent. We go back to the validation here. This was the VBB. We have the automatic completion of the monitoring report. We have that it was verified. And finally, that we minted the WRCs. And you can open up that VC file and see the issuance date. You see the date that it was minted, the amount, the token ID. All right, well, thank you all for joining, and I hope to see you here next month. We'll have a policy breakdown for the gold standard RICE methodology.